I didn't expect the freezing wind to change my life. It was 11:36 p.m. when I saw her, barefoot, coatless, and hugging herself beneath the flickering yellow streetlight on Fifth Avenue. Her arms were locked tight around her ribs, trembling like her soul was trying to escape her skin. She wasn't just cold. She looked broken. I stopped in my tracks, heart pounding for reasons I couldn't explain. Maybe it was the way her eyes darted around, hollow and desperate, or maybe it was because something about her felt wrong. Not wrong like dangerous. Wrong like she didn't belong here. And I couldn't just walk by. "Hey," I said gently, stepping closer while pulling my coat tighter around me. "Are you okay?" She startled, like she hadn't realized someone was watching. Her eyes shot to mine, big, glassy, and haunted. "I'm fine," she muttered quickly. "Please, just go." But I didn't move. "Look, it's freezing. You'll get sick out here." I slowly unzipped my coat and extended it toward her. "Take this. I'm only a few blocks away from home." Her lips parted slightly, but no words came. She hesitated. Then her eyes filled, just a shimmer, but it was like watching a dam break in slow motion. "You don't even know me," she whispered. "I don't need to." She stared at the coat, then back at me. "You might regret this." I laughed a little, trying to keep it light. "I regret a lot of things. Giving you a coat won't be one of them." After a moment, she reached out with trembling hands and slid the coat over her thin frame. My coat swallowed her whole. She looked safer, warmer. But something about the way she looked at me, that last second before she turned and walked away, stuck in my mind. A flicker of fear. And something else. Something like guilt. I watched her disappear into the shadows of the night, swallowed by the frost-covered sidewalk and the hum of distant traffic. I didn't even get her name. I turned and walked home in just my hoodie, shivering as the cold sliced through the fabric. But I couldn't shake her face from my memory. Her sunken cheeks. That bruised silence in her voice. And that strange, final look like she knew something I didn't. I barely slept. The next morning, I sat in my cramped studio apartment, nursing burnt coffee and scrolling through news headlines just to distract myself. And then I saw it. Missing millionaire heiress found alive after vanishing for 3 weeks. My heart slammed into my ribs. I clicked the article, breath caught somewhere in my throat. The photo was blurry, grainy, but I knew that face. It was her. The same girl I gave my coat to last night. Her name was Ava Lorne, heiress to the Lorne family empire, Lorne Biotech. Estimated net worth, $3.2 billion. My coat was still on her in the photo. She was being led into an ambulance, eyes wide, almost dazed. I dropped my phone. This didn't make any sense. Why would a billionaire's daughter be alone in the city at night, freezing to death like a forgotten ghost? I grabbed my keys and rushed out, a storm brewing in my chest. I had 1,000 questions, and no answers. But what I didn't know yet was this. I had just stepped into something much darker than I ever could have imagined. By noon, Ava's face was plastered across every news station. The headlines swirled like vultures. Heiress escapes captivity. Ava Lorne rescued from trafficking ring. Family refuses to comment on her whereabouts. I stood in front of my TV, heart racing. That wasn't just a stranger anymore. I had touched her shoulder. I had seen the terror in her eyes. I had heard her whisper, "You might regret this." And now I was regretting not asking more. My phone buzzed. Unknown number. I hesitated before picking up. "Hello." Silence. Then a voice, low, gruff, and chilling. "You shouldn't have gotten involved." Click. My blood turned to ice. What the hell is going on? I paced, staring at the locked front door like it might explode. I had no idea who that was, or how they got my number. But suddenly, I realized something that made my stomach turn. She still had my coat. In the left inside pocket was my ID. I flew into a panic. Why hadn't I checked before handing it over? It was stupid, reckless. But I didn't think I'd be giving it to someone who'd end up on national news. And now, whoever had her or had been looking for her had a way to find me. I didn't know who to trust. The police? The media? They were crawling all over the story, and if I stepped forward now, I'd be dragged into the storm. But something told me she needed help. The news only told one side. And something about the way Ava looked in those pictures, empty, frightened, didn't match the headlines painting her as safe. So I did the only thing I could think of. I showed up at the hospital where they were keeping her. The building was a fortress. Cameras, reporters, security like a presidential visit. I stood across the street, watching nurses wheel patients through the glass, sliding doors. I wasn't sure what my plan was. Sneak in? Pretend to be press? That's when I saw a man in a charcoal gray suit step out the side entrance, talking on a phone, his voice low and sharp. He wasn't a doctor. He wasn't press. He looked like someone who wasn't supposed to be there. My gut clenched. I followed him, kept a block's distance, blending with the flow of foot traffic. He walked fast, turned corners without checking his back. But I noticed something weird. He wasn't just walking aimlessly. He was tailing someone else. A young nurse, petite, blonde, carrying a clipboard. And she was heading straight into the hospital. My pulse spiked. Ava wasn't safe. Something else was happening. And I was already in way too deep. The man in the suit stopped at a bench across from the hospital entrance, watching the nurse vanish through the sliding doors. He didn't move, just lit a cigarette and stared. I ducked behind a row of parked bikes and pulled out my phone. If I was going to help Ava, I needed someone on the inside. Someone like that nurse. So I waited until she came back out 20 minutes later, then intercepted her halfway down the block. "Hey, excuse me," I said, trying not to sound frantic. She turned, wary. "Can I help you?" "I'm not press," I said quickly. I think Ava Lauren's in danger." Again. She blinked. "I'm sorry. I'm not allowed to talk about." "She had my coat on when they found her," I said, stepping closer. I was the one who saw her last. That coat had my ID. "I've been getting threats." That froze her. She studied me for a long second, then said softly, "Come with me." We ducked into an alley, away from prying eyes. "She's not doing well," the nurse said, her voice trembling. "She keeps asking for someone named Logan." "Is that you?" I felt the ground tilt under me. "Yeah," I whispered. "That's me." My name on her lips. It hit me like a punch to the chest. She remembered me. Somehow, in the chaos, in whatever nightmare she'd escaped from. She remembered me. "Can I see her?" I asked. The nurse hesitated. "Technically,
No.
but after what you just told me," she looked around and lowered her voice. 10 minutes. Side entrance. No cameras. She scribbled something on her clipboard, ripped the corner off, and pressed it into my hand. "Room 607. Don't talk to anyone else. Don't give your name. And if anyone asks, your family." Then she was gone. And I was sprinting across the street with my heart in my throat. The hallway smelled like antiseptic and secrets. I kept my hood up and head down, nodding at a janitor who barely looked at me. I found room 607. My hand froze on the handle. Was I ready for this? I opened the door. And there she was.
Ava.
She looked even smaller now, swallowed by white sheets, eyes half closed, tubes running from her arm. But when I stepped inside, her gaze snapped to mine. And just like that, the fear cracked. She whispered, "Logan." Her voice broke. I walked to her side and knelt beside the bed. "You're safe now," I said softly. "No," she whispered, "I'm not. They're coming for me. And now they'll come for you too." "Ava," I said, my voice low and urgent. "Who's coming?" Her hands clutched the blanket like it was armor. Her lips trembled. "My family. You don't understand, they didn't report me missing. They sold me." I froze. "What?" She nodded, her eyes wild. "They staged the whole thing. Said I was kidnapped. But it was a deal. They were trading me for immunity. For money. They said I was expendable." Her chest hitched. "But I escaped. I got away. And then you." She looked at me like I was her last piece of sanity. "They'll kill me before I talk. They already tried once." I stared at her. the weight of what she said sinking like lead in my gut. This wasn't the missing person case. It was a cover-up. And I had just stepped onto the wrong side of a billionaire war. I wanted to protect her. I needed to. But how do you fight people who own everything? Before I could answer that question, her door swung open. A man in a hospital badge stepped in, but his eyes were cold. Calculating. Too cold for a nurse. Ava went pale. That's not staff. He's one of them. I reacted instantly. I grabbed the four-pole, slammed it into the guy's chest, and yanked Ava out of the bed. She winced but stumbled to her feet. "Run!" I shouted. We bolted through the emergency stairwell. Her bare feet slapped against the cold tile. I didn't know where we were going, just away. Away from whoever wanted her silenced. Away from the family that traded her like stock options. And now I was a target too. We burst out into the freezing alley behind the hospital. I peeled off my hoodie and threw it over her shoulders. She was shivering again, just like that night. "Come on," I said. "We can't stay here." She nodded, teeth chattering, but her legs buckled. I caught her. "You're not strong enough." "I'm not going back," she said fiercely, eyes filled with fire. "We won't," I promised. "But we need help." There was only one place left I trusted, my friend Sam's garage. He owed me his life. Tonight I was cashing that in. Sam's eyes widened when I showed up at the garage door with a billionaire's daughter in a stolen wheelchair, shaking in my hoodie. "You're kidding me," he muttered. "You brought her here?" "Just help me get her inside," I said. "And lock the damn doors." We pulled her into the back office. I wrapped her in blankets while Sam fetched warm soup and turned on the space heater. Ava finally breathed out, her face lit by the orange glow of a dusty lamp. "This place smells like motor oil and coffee," she murmured. "I love it." It was the first time she smiled. But it didn't last. Her hands gripped mine. "They're watching the news. If they find us before I talk." She didn't finish. But I knew. They wouldn't just kill her. They'd erase us both. Sam paced as Ava explained everything. The deal. The offshore accounts. Her father's empire of secrets. "They used my name to launder millions through charity fronts," she said bitterly. "When I found out and threatened to go public, they offered me a deal. Step down quietly or disappear." She took a shaky breath. I said no. So they made me vanish. I clenched my jaw. "We're going to expose them." She gave me a look I'll never forget. "You're just a mechanic, Logan." I smiled grimly. So were the guys who built revolutions. We moved fast. Sam hacked into Ava's cloud drive. She had evidence, documents, signed memos, video calls. Everything she wasn't supposed to have access to. And she backed it all up to a USB. "Take it to the press," she said. "Make sure it's real journalists. Not anyone on their payroll." I took the drive. It felt heavier than metal. "You'll be safe here," I said, reaching for the doorknob. "No, I won't," Ava said, rising to her feet. "I'm coming with you. You're barely standing." She stepped forward, shaky but defiant. "I'd rather die on my feet than live on my knees." That's when I realized she wasn't just a survivor. She was a fighter. We drove into the city in Sam's beat-up van. Ava hid under blankets in the back, phone in hand, messaging a reporter she trusted from before her disappearance. "Emily Price," she whispered. "She tried to help me once." They silenced her. We pulled up 2 blocks from Emily's apartment. "I'll go first," I said. "Scope it out." But Ava grabbed my arm. "No." "We walk in together." I nodded. "All right." We stepped into the hallway of Emily's building and froze. The door to her unit was open. Inside was chaos. Papers scattered. A shattered lamp. Broken glass. Ava whispered, "They got here first." I turned slowly, instincts kicking in, and saw the shadow moving at the end of the hall. I shoved Ava behind me and backed us into a stairwell. We raced down the steps, the sound of fast-approaching footsteps above us. Whoever was after us wasn't subtle anymore. They were cleaning up. Silencing. We burst through the emergency exit and sprinted into the night. I didn't stop until my lungs burned. We ducked behind a dumpster in an alley, gasping. They killed her, Ava said through gritted teeth. Emily was our last shot. No, I said, pulling the USB from my pocket. We have this. She looked at me, eyes wet. You don't get it, Logan. They don't need to control the media. They own it. We needed a new plan. One they couldn't predict.
So we went underground.
Sam's cousin ran an old film shop, one of the last in the city. He owed Sam favors. On the third night, crash in the back, we uploaded behind walls of outdated anonymous cameras to and 3 independent platforms. For the next 2 days, impossible to trace back. And the title, barely slept. The $1 billion daughter. We started documenting everything on old school and gear. My family tapes, tried to erase handwritten records. We duplicate USBs. Then we waited. I used to live in mansions. Nothing. Ava muttered. Then chaos. Cold instant coffee. The story exploded like wildfire. Now I'm hiding in a room with a cracked toilet. Indie news channel. You're still breathing. Ex-employees came out of the shadows. And your story's not over. Ava's face was everywhere. She looked at me then, but this time, she was maybe speaking. You're the only real person I've met in years. Her truth. But with it came the storm. We heard the car doors before we saw them. Black SUVs. No plates. They didn't knock. They smashed through the film shop. Sam's cousin screamed as we bolted out the back. Gunshots. Screaming. Chaos. We ran. They chased us through the train yard. I dragged Ava behind an abandoned freight car, heart pounding. One of them shouted, "She's with the mechanic. Find them." Ava was crying, but not from fear. From fury. "I'm done hiding," she whispered. I turned to her. "Then let's make them regret every second." We led them into a trap. Sam had rigged a motion detector with pink canisters and flashbangs from his army surplus stash. When they stepped into the alley, we lit them up. 3 men blinded. 2 others taken down by civilians who recognized Ava from the news. Police finally arrived, real ones. Not bought. And for the first time in weeks, the world seemed to tilt in our favor. Ava walked out of the shadows and faced the flashing lights. Cameras. Reporters.
Mics.
She didn't flinch. "My name is Ava Lorne," she said, clear and strong. "And my family is not above the law anymore." The world fell silent, then erupted. They tried to spin it. The Lorne family released a statement calling Ava mentally unstable, claiming she was confused, traumatized, and manipulated by outside influences. They called me one of those influences. But the public wasn't buying it this time. Too many whistleblowers came forward.
Too many dots connected.
The video had already reached 20 million views. Ava wasn't just a headline anymore. She had become a movement, and they were terrified. The next week was chaos. Ava testified behind closed doors. The Department of Justice opened an investigation. Assets were frozen. Board members were arrested. And her father? He disappeared. Rumors swirled. Private jet, foreign bank accounts, fake passports. "I don't want to run anymore," she told me one night, curled up on Sam's cousin's couch. "I want to stand. I want to fight." "You already are," I said. She looked over at me with tears in her eyes. "No," she said softly. "I survived. Now it's time I take back everything." The day of the public hearing, Ava walked into the courthouse wearing a dark tailored coat, my coat. The same one I gave her when she was shivering and lost. Except now, she didn't look lost. She looked like vengeance wrapped in silk and fire. She walked past reporters like a queen in exile returning to her throne. And when she took the stand, she burned every lie they'd ever told down to ash. Her voice never cracked. Her story never wavered. My name was used to build empires. My silence was bought with pain. But I'm not silent anymore. The aftermath was swift and brutal. Federal agents raided Lorne Biotech headquarters. Ava's uncle, CFO, and 2 executive board members were indicted. Her mother fled to Monaco. Her brother went into hiding. Her father was still missing.
But none of it mattered now.
Because the empire was crumbling. And Ava? She wasn't running from her name anymore.
She was owning it.
Using her inherited shares, she dismantled the board from within. Donated millions to survivors of human trafficking. Funded shelters, therapy centers, and whistleblower protection programs. She turned her pain into power. And I was there every step of the way. 3 months later, we stood on the rooftop of a building she now owned, a nonprofit foundation she named after Emily Price. Sometimes I still wake up expecting to be back in that alley, Ava whispered, watching the skyline.
Cold.
Alone. Forgotten. You'll never be any of those again, I said, placing a hand over hers. She turned to me, eyes shining. You gave me your coat that night, Logan. You didn't know who I was, but you saw me. I see you now, too, I said.
She leaned in.
And for the first time since this all began, she smiled with peace in her eyes. Not fear, not rage, just peace. And we stood there, two survivors in a city full of shadows. But now, we weren't hiding anymore. We were the light. The news broke at dawn. Lorne patriarch caught in Argentina during multi-nation sting. Ava's father, Marcus Lorne, once considered untouchable, was led away in handcuffs, surrounded by federal agents. His face, once plastered on magazine covers, was pale and sunken. No cameras followed him now. No applause. Only silence. Ava watched it live. Then she turned off the screen and said quietly, "Let's go to court." She didn't celebrate. She didn't gloat. Because she knew real power wasn't in revenge. It was in reclaiming the parts of herself they tried to destroy. The courtroom was full.
Press.
Prosecutors. Survivors. And Ava. She took the stand once again, this time to confront her father face to face. He sat across from her in an orange jumpsuit, shackled. She didn't flinch. "You called me your daughter while selling me like property," she said. "But I am not your product. I am your reckoning." Marcus said nothing, because there was nothing left to say. The judge sentenced him to 40 years. And Ava never looked back. That night, after the verdict, she and I walked along the same street where we first met. It was snowing again. Soft, delicate flakes settled in her hair like ash from a fire long extinguished. She stopped under the same flickering streetlight. "This is where you gave me your coat," she said, staring up into the falling snow. "I was invisible, and you saw me." "I didn't save you, Ava," I whispered. "You saved yourself. I just handed you a little warmth." She smiled. "You gave me more than warmth. You gave me choice." Then she took my hand. And for the first time, her fingers weren't cold anymore. 6 months later, Ava launched a global foundation called The Unseen. It protected and empowered survivors, especially those silenced by wealth, power, or fear.
She spoke at the UN.
She testified before Congress. She rebuilt her legacy, brick by brick, not with money, but with truth. And every time she stood in front of cameras, microphones, or victims who thought no one would ever believe them, she wore the same thing. That coat. My coat. Tattered at the cuffs. Slightly faded, but powerful, because it had become a symbol of kindness, of rebellion, of hope. 1 year to the day, we returned to that streetlight, not because we had to, but because Ava wanted to thank the city for how it changed her. She placed a plaque at the base of the post.
It read,
"To the girl who was forgotten, you were never alone. And to anyone lost in the cold, you're seen." As the wind picked up, she turned to me. "You ever wonder how one act of kindness changed everything?" she asked. I smiled. It didn't just change everything. It saved it. She leaned her head against my shoulder. No longer cold. No longer hiding. And in the heart of winter, surrounded by silence, something warm began again. A life. A future. A legacy. All because I gave her my coat. And she gave the world her voice.